Hola a todos y todas, estamos acá con Brock Reeve. Él es un asesor que vino a Impact y con el cual estamos hoy día para hacer una entrevista, una pequeña entrevista. Él, para que ustedes lo conozcan, es exdirector del Harvard Stem Cell Institute y actualmente es CEO y cofundador de EOS Bioinnovations. Welcome everyone to this first video for our YouTube channel. We are right now with Brock Reeve. He's an expert that is right now with us here in the center. He's the executive director of Harvard Stem Cell Institute, and he's currently the CEO and co-founder of EOS Bioinnovations. Welcome.
Thank you.
First, let's start with something simple.
Uh-oh.
Okay? I want to know what inspired you to pursue a career in regenerative medicine.
Well, that goes back a long time.
Okay.
So before I was at Harvard, I was in the consulting world and in the life sciences world. And I was doing a project for a person who was then the chief technology officer at Becton Dickinson, now known as BD. And they made, as you may know, they make a lot of the needles and syringes for diabetics. As the head of technology for the company, he said, I remember his phrase, he said, no matter how sharp a needle we make, how pain-free, people still don't like putting needles in themselves. What's the future of diabetes therapy? That, at the time, led me to what companies were doing in the insulin world, understanding diabetic development. And there were several companies in the biotech space in Boston making islet cells from pigs at the time, porcine islets. That didn't play out commercially. Those companies didn't succeed. But that led me to understand work that was then going on in understanding cellular development and stem cells and also human stem cell development. And in fact, introduced me to one of the leading scientists interested in diabetes at that time, Doug Melton at Harvard. Fast forward many years later when Harvard set up the Stem Cell Institute, Professor Melton called me up and said, we set up this institute. Do you know anyone who might want to run it? I thought about it for a while and volunteered. At the same time, in the intervening years, it was also true that my older brother, Christopher, had a riding accident, broke his neck, and was hospitalized and died from it, but the complications. But was looking at how can we accelerate development in the field from stem cell science to be able to do things not only like grow beta cells for insulin therapy, but grow neurons, grow other type of cells to repair. And so that's what led me to it, sort of both understanding the scientific opportunity, the chance, the personal motivation, and also the fact, and the reason I went to Harvard at the time, because the Institute was a way of combining Harvard and the Harvard hospitals to work together in a collaborative manner to tackle stem cell science in different disease areas, different organ systems. And so it was a different R&D model as well. So from a business perspective, the challenge was how do you accelerate R&D in a complicated field when no one lab is going to have all the resources and know-how? And so how do you have collaborative, multidisciplinary collaborative science to accelerate both scientific understanding, but also ultimately therapeutic development?
That is very interesting, actually.
Yeah, so there are multiple elements. The short answer is there are multiple elements.
Yeah, but over the years, has that perspective changed? Do you think, and also I want to know, what do you think is the future for therapeutic treatments, like stem cells and all of that?
Yeah, I think the basic idea I don't think has changed. In fact, I think the notion of interdisciplinary collaboration is even more important today than it was before because, there are new tools like, new gene editing tools, new cell analytic tools, new computational capability, growth of AI, et cetera, that are opening up new paths, new therapeutic paths. And also means that no one lab, no one discipline is going to understand that. At the same time, it's also important, I think, to have the connection with the clinic to understand the problem that you're trying to solve. So it's not just science, as pure science, but science sort of in pursuit of a mission. That mission is to cure or at least impact the disease. Now, that said, as we think about regenerative medicine, there is a lot of people think it's just cell and gene therapy. But one of the things that the science has shown us that there are other ways to have a regenerative or therapeutic effect. So you could, for example, look at a small molecule to stimulate an endogenous repair mechanism or endogenous stem cell pool. You could look at, certain vehicles, like whether it's lipid nanoparticles or extracellular vesicles, to deliver drugs to tissues to enable them to repair rather than applying a stem cell therapy. So the field originally started as sort of stem cell as replacement parts, but now with advancement, I think, in different modalities, we actually have many more modalities to choose from as we think about what can actually have a regenerative effect.
And following that, which one do you think are the most promising developments in advanced medicine at the time? Which one do you think? And how do you think also that can influence the future research in all of this, all of this research and clinical applications?
Yeah, I don't think there's a simple answer to that question because there's no single answer. You can't say cell therapy is the answer. Because in some cases, like in diabetes, in type 1 diabetes, where you don't have beta, you don't have these islet cells. The only way to create more islet cells is to make them. You can't stimulate an endogenous pool. You can't give yourself a drug to make more of them. So you can only do a cell replacement strategy. That's really the only answer. In other cases, in fact, you do have alternative solutions, like we're saying a drug to stimulate an endogenous repair or using vehicles to do, or gene correction therapy or what have you. So it depends what problem you're trying to solve is what the right tool or the right modality is. And so I'm going to avoid directly answering your question by saying that there is no single answer to it.
And what about like immunotherapy, like CAR T or like TALS, like TILS?
Oh, TILS. Yeah, sorry.
I don't know if it was TILS or TILS. What about that? What do you think is the future of that?
Well, CAR T is super interesting, right? And people like Carl June, who pioneered that field, showed how you can use autologous, T cells and engineer them and essentially fix, the patient's immune reaction. Originally, people got all excited because they thought it'd be both relevant for both liquid tumors as well as solid tumors. And they found out, well, in fact, it's not. They don't work well in solid tumors. And also, the cost, at least in the U.S., of an autologous CAR T therapy is very expensive. And so, right now, the challenge in the field is it's not saying CAR T therapy is going away, but it's how do you improve that? How do you make it off the shelf, for example? How do you make it cheaper? How do you make it relevant for solid tumors? And if it does, then how does it compete with other techniques as well? So I think the future of CAR T therapy isn't going to be just CD19 CAR Ts. It's going to be different engineering strategies for CAR Ts, including off the shelf, including ways to engineer them to be relevant for solid tumors.
Okay, we have a long way to go.
Yeah, we do. But that means more opportunity, right? There's more stuff to do. Otherwise, you'd be bored and wouldn't have anything to do.
That's true. That's true. I'd be bored. So, about extracellular vesicles, we talked about that. What do you think, in your perspective, of the role of extracellular vesicles in the regenerative medicine of drug delivery? We talked about that a little bit, but how do you think this is going to develop in the future? Do you see this is going to be like something really important, or there are other therapies that are going to be I don't know, more important than this one?
Yeah,
Which are
I
the
think
applications?
I think the or part of that question is wrong because I think it's an and
Okay.
question, right?
Okay.
Because it could be both important and, there could be other things, right?
Okay. Yes.
And I think extracellular vesicles are super interesting because essentially what they are the products of cells, and because cells are communicating with one another, right? And
Yeah.
what are these factors that they're giving off? What signals are they sending to each other? All that sort of thing. And the attractiveness of EVs is that you can make them in a more repeatable and manageable ways than manufacturing cells, right? Because cells are essentially living products
Yes.
that change all the time, and making a manufacturable product is a hard thing to do on a consistent basis. But EVs have many of the capabilities of the cells that they come from. So the attractiveness is that they can solve some of those problems, like in autoimmune inflammatory conditions, et cetera. And the fact that they can also traffic to sites of inflammation, and then you can also engineer them to go to tissues of interest. So I think thinking of them as a delivery vehicle is super interesting, but there are also other delivery vehicles, right? And so the challenge for the field is not to say EVs are the delivery vehicle of the future, is to say what delivery vehicle is relevant for what tissue, with what sort of cargo, with what sort of effect.
Everything has to be like really personal, like
Not personalized, but you have to understand the problem you're trying to solve, right? So if you look
depends.
if you look at delivery vehicles in the real world, right? Sometimes the moped guy delivers your food, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the van does. Sometimes a whole truck does, right?
Depends.
So I think it depends. Think about the right tool for the right delivery
Yeah.
of the right product to the right place at the right time.
A lot to think about.
Yeah.
I want to come back to we talk about the importance of making the therapies accessible to lower the costs, so it can be important to people, etc. So I wanted to ask you, based on your experience directing the Center of Excellence in Stem Cells and Advanced Therapies, how can a research center, first of all, reach sustainability, but also how can we, as this center, help to make all of these therapies more accessible, to give them to the people that need them, all of that. Which one are the like the points that we have to have?
Yeah, that's a huge question for the cell and gene therapy space, right? Because, for example, right now in the U.S., some of the gene therapies their price tag is millions of dollars, right? Or back to your CAR T example, it's like $500,000, which is just not sustainable. I mean, for example, one of the ironies is that sickle cell disease, they have some gene therapy therapies for that, are priced at $1 to $2 million. That might be affordable in parts of the U.S., but it's not affordable in Africa, where sickle cell disease is much more prevalent, right? Or in the poorer parts of the U.S., where it's much more prevalent. So the cost of the therapy is a huge issue. And so what people now are doing is saying, how can we bring those costs down? So it's doing things like working in places where either the cost of a clinical trial is much lower, or you can do it a lot faster, or your lower cost of production. And so I think in countries like Chile, countries like other parts where you have resources that can help do things at a lower cost in a shorter time frame in a more focused way, can help bring the cost of therapy down by orders of magnitude, or maybe that's an exaggeration, but at least by a factor of several fold, will have huge value. And part of that value is also the value of time, right? Because if you have, and part of what's the cost of a drug is everything that goes wrong in the development process, as well as the length and complexity of clinical trials. And so again, if you can manage clinical trials in a more cost-effective way, in a shorter way, and then integrate that with regulatory agencies in other countries so that products can be approved around the world in a more coordinated way, which is starting to happen more and more. I think that'll really help a lot. So, for example, right now, a lot of companies are doing, trials in Australia at the same time as in the U.S., or they're doing development, in one part of the world, the same, and then moving it to another part of the world. So, thinking about global research as well as global clinical trials will, I think, help drive that down, as opposed to sort of the standard, life as we know it today.
Okay. Well, we have a common goal, that's to make these therapies more accessible, to give it to people that need them. And following that line, what do you think, also, more like how important it is to have a good relationship with the government and to work together to make this goal reality?
Yeah, and in the abstract, very important. In particular, I can't speak to it, but it also, for example, depends on not only the government regulatory agency, but also the how the healthcare system in that country works, right? So in the
it's different here in the United States.
So in the United States, where it's basically a private pay system, except for the only national healthcare, either Medicare or the Veterans Administration, it's very different than in the UK, where it's the national health system and some private pay. Or I think here I understand there's both the public and then the private system,
it's both.
Right. So, for example, the reimbursement scheme in the U.S., the FDA approves, but then it's up to industry and the insurance companies to agree on what the price is. The companies can say, I'm going to sell at this price, and insurance either agrees or doesn't. Whereas in the UK, you have NICE, and the NICE is their pricing, that says something is medically valuable enough at this price point for the NHS to reimburse it. And if it's not, they don't pay for it and you don't sell it, right? Unless you do in the private system. So there, and I don't know if there's a similar system here, but so that the integration with government is important, because what organizations like NICE are trying to do is establish the value for the healthcare system, and they've agreed to some very expensive therapies because they say, look, if I can do a cell or gene therapy early in life and avoid a lifetime of medical costs, that's really worth it, right? There's huge value that can be created. In other cases, say, yeah, that's true, but there are, many other, treatments available. People can manage that disease. That's not really worth it, right? And in other cases, like we're talking about the sickle cell case, where you say at certain points, the healthcare system just can't pay for that, so forget it, right? Unless you do it at this price point. And so companies are becoming much more aware of it. And at some point, some of the U.S. companies are going to get sort of hit over the head in the U.S. with that issue too. But that's a topic for another day.
Yeah, that's a topic for another day. Well, as last question, because I know you're tired.
Do I look that tired? Oh no.
I've been
staying awake this whole conversation. I've been staying awake.
You've had a busy agenda. I know that. What are the advantages of developing a cell and gene therapy pipeline in Chile compared to importing existing technologies? Do you have an opinion about that?
Yeah.
Do you think it's an opportunity?
Do I have a knowledgeable opinion is another question. But
do you think it's an opportunity? Do you see that?
All kidding aside, I think it is, because I think if you rely on importation, you're always going to be behind the curve, right? Okay. You're going to wait for other people to do that, and then you think, okay, how do I adapt it to my environment or my. And whereas here, particularly if you can drive development and adoption into your market and know, yes, we have a therapy for this patient population that we can deliver at this, at this price point that is affordable, et cetera, right? Because, it is true that clinical, trial costs here, development costs would be lower than in the U.S. So if you do things here and create a cost-effective therapy, that makes tons of sense. And then that'll open up other markets for you guys, as opposed to if you wait for a therapy to come from the outside and then say, okay, now what, right? You're always, again, sort of after the fact and not in charge of your own agenda. There always are going to be therapies that come from the outside, but I think also having the capability to do the development and drive that will create value here that won't be relevant just for Chile, but would be relevant for, Latin America more broadly, as well as other countries too.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to say or advice I would want to give, I don't know, researchers or clinical workers or anything?
No, no question. But as advice, I think we just, as a field, we all need to continue to work on this challenge and say, how do we work together, not only across discipline, across institutions, across countries, to use our better understanding of to accelerate these sorts of therapies and cures that, they weren't possible 20 years ago and are now possible today. And we should, continue to think of how we can be even more creative about solutions in the next 20 years.
So it's important collaboration.
Collaboration and good science.
Yeah,
and,
good science.
And will let us solve the problems.
Okay.
But there are more problems to solve.
Of course, there will always be more problems. So thank you very much, Brock, for being today with me in this broadcast. Muchas gracias a todos por ver. Este fue nuestro primer video, nuestra primera entrevista con Brock Reeves. La van a poder ver. Por favor, suscríbanse a nuestro canal. Y eso es todo. Chao. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.